Hi guys, my name is Arya, and yet again I welcome you all to a video that we at the Edureka are presenting to you. And today we are going to be taking a deeper look into Angular. So, most of you out there probably know what Angular is, or you've heard about Angular at some point of time in your life when you are especially discussing web development with your friends. So this is the Angular tutorial that we are presenting from Edureka. We are going to be taking a deeper look into Angular, how it is written, how we can write Angular apps. And in this tutorial, we will be covering the very ground hard basics of actually creating any apps out there. Most of the YouTube videos out there that teach you Angular kind of assume what you already know, and they kind of start off with an app and you kind of learn on the way of creating that app. But this video is going to be very different. We are going to be taking a very classroom like approach to learning Angular through this video. So this is the first video that is going to be out there in a list of videos that we have planned out for teaching you guys Angular, and we are aiming the latest versions of Angular, and we will be always updating these videos in any case when Angular is changed. So this is going to be targeted to Angular 8. So as I just said, we are going to be taking a very classroom-like approach. Now, what do I mean when I say we are going to be taking a classroom-like approach? Well, it's just that, like in a classroom, after you've learned a chunk of what you are meant to learn, you are given an assignment which tests your abilities to apply those fundamentals in a very practical fashion. So we are going to be having two assignments in this thing. Actually, we are going to be having probably three assignments. We will decide that on the way. If I deem necessary that you go through an assignment, you will get one. So these are the topics that we are going to be covering throughout this Angular tutorial. So first of all, we are going to be targeting what is Angular, where I will give you guys a very brief introduction to what Angular is, what it does. We are also be going to look into what's new in Angular 8. So this is Angular 8, and some of you guys might be thinking that, I've missed out on a lot of things. How am I going to catch up? Don't worry, I'll get to that just in a second. After we have gone through a little bit of the theory of what is Angular and what's new in Angular 8, we're going to jump right into the practical parts. And the practical parts start up with you setting up your local Angular projects. So we will go through the project setup. We will also be writing our first very basic and simple application. We are not going to be incorporating a lot of complicated modules into this. This is going to be a very, very simple application, just so that you know how everything works, how Angular as a big jigsaw puzzle fits all the pieces together. After we have written a little of our first application, you will soon realize that Angular uses a superset of JavaScript called TypeScript. So we will be taking a very brief look into TypeScript. I will not get into much about teaching you guys TypeScript. You can basically look up another video for that. This is meant for Angular, and that is exactly what we will be doing. After I have given you guys a very brief introduction to TypeScript, we will be also looking at how you can integrate external CSS into your Angular application. So we will mostly be using Bootstrap 3, and we will be learning how to actually integrate that into your Angular applications. After that, we will be looking at a very basic fundamental, and that is how an Angular app gets loaded. Most of the people who learn Angular today, and they're very beginner-like, they will go ahead and write an application, but most of them will not even know how the application is getting loaded and how it is brought to your screen and what are the file systems that are actually being invoked. So we'll be actually addressing this very important topic as to how an Angular app gets loaded. After that, we will also jump right into the building blocks of Angular, and that is a component. We will be looking at how you can create a component from a CLI. We will also be looking at how you can create your custom components manually. Above that, we will be targeting data binding. So data binding will include two-way data binding, string interpolation, and property binding. After that, we will also do event binding. We will be looking at directives, what they are, how they do it, but we will be not looking into how you can write your own custom directives. So if you are here on this video expecting to learn about custom directives and how you can write them, well, this is not the video meant for you. We will be releasing a video on how you can build your custom directives. In fact, we will be releasing a video on all these topics separately. That is components, where we take a much, much deeper look into what a component is, how it is made, every piece of code that goes into a component. We will be doing the same with data binding, event binding, and directives. Last but not least, about this particular video, we will be learning some inbuilt directives that ship with Angular. mostly ngIf, ngFor, and stuff like that. So those are pretty useful stuff, and we will be creating some really simple stuff. So as I said, I will be giving you guys some small assignments as we go along the way. So let's plan the assignments out. So after I've taught you guys how a component is made, I'm going to go ahead and get you guys to make your own components, and you can go ahead and then check your solutions with mine. We will also be having an assignment on data binding and event binding, and we will also be having an assignment for inbuilt directives and how you can use them in your application. So that's about it. So to make the most of this video, I will suggest that when I give you these assignments, and after you have properly understood the concept, only then you should attempt the assignment. So when you're attempting the assignment, please do not code along with me. Mostly use the code along part of the assignment just to check if you have done the solution properly. Not only will this give you a better oomph at learning Angular, it will also churn your brains, get them to think in a very Angular sort of way. Now that I have put down everything that I need to tell you guys before we start with the course and this Angular tutorial, let's get started basically. Just another small thing I want to get out of the way. If you don't know Angular 7, Angular 5, or anything like that, that goes up to late, don't worry, you can still follow along with this course because you'll understand just in a while why. So the first topic that we are going to cover today is a very theoretical topic. So that is, what is Angular? So it only makes sense to start with what exactly is Angular. So for viewers who are watching any Angular video for the first time, you deserve an introduction to what you are learning. Now, most of you, I assume, actually already have done your research before coming onto YouTube and typing out Angular tutorial. So it's only mandatory that I give you this introduction. So first of all, Angular is a front-end development framework. Now that's out of the way, let's get into what front-end development framework means. So if you have any web developer friends, you will constantly hear two words, backend and frontend, backend and frontend. So what do these two words mean? Well, the roles of a web developer are forked into two very distinct branches in this industry. The first is that of a backend developer, and the second is that of a front-end developer. Now, a backend developer is responsible for mostly everything that happens on the back end. So basically, stuff like routing. Well, routing is also done by front-end developers, but that's another thing. But routing is basically the job of a backend developer. Fetching things from a server, writing the JavaScript for all that things, that is a complete backend developer thing. Setting up the server, for in fact, setting up the database schema, that's everything a backend developer does. What the front-end developer does mostly entails what you see on your screen right now. So the way you see Facebook, the way it's designed, how the news feed is actually placed like that, that is the job of a front-end developer. He makes sure that everything on the website looks tip-top and smack perfect, and he does this with a lot of optimization. So mostly back in the day, front end mostly used to be done by HTML and CSS, and CSS used to get very complicated in this fashion. It still is a little complicated if you want to present a very polished website, but creating the HTML and making it much more reactive is what the framework does for you. So most online sites will say that front-end development framework is also referred to as a CSS framework. Well, while this is very true, it's not so perfect of a thing to say that it is a CSS framework. It is more of a reactive HTML framework, and I will explain just now how. So the second thing that you should know about Angular is that it is maintained and developed by Google. So AngularJS is a JavaScript-based open source front-end framework mainly maintained by Google and by a community of individuals and corporations to address many of the challenges encountered in developing single-page applications. We'll also get to what single-page applications mean in a moment. It aims to simplify both development and the testing of such applications by providing a framework for client-side model view controller, that is the MVC architecture, or the model view model controller, or the MVVM architectures as you might know it. So basically, it's maintained and developed by Google. Now, if you know Google, you know things they give you as a product is amazing. Things like Flutter really took off. Android, we know what it is today. And AngularJS has been out there since a long time. It's got an amazing community. If you have any sort of doubt, you can go ahead and post it out on Stack Overflow under the Angular tab, and you will probably get an answer almost immediately. Other than that, your problems might already be there posted by somebody else who is developing and face the same problem. So basically, you have a great community, great support from Google, and it's a breeze to work with Angular today. The third thing that you need to know about Angular is that it is a JavaScript-based framework. Now, if that was not already obvious from Angular 1, which is named Angular JS, well, I'm just putting it out there. It is JavaScript based. So why is it a good thing that it is JavaScript based? Well, JavaScript is commonly known as the language of the web. So if you are interacting with any part of the web, you're probably going to use JavaScript or the JavaScript engine. You might be doing unknowingly, but you are definitely doing it. For example, you're watching this video on YouTube right now. You are using a JavaScript engine that runs a video framework. So yeah, so if you know JavaScript, you basically know how to talk to the web. So when you're trying to learn Angular, you don't really have to learn a new language. For example, when you're learning Flutter, you have to learn about Dart. So Dart is a new language that is developed by Google and is used in Flutter, that is their mobile application development framework. If you want to go learn Flutter, you can check out my Flutter tutorial on Edureka. But for now, you need to know that Angular is based on JavaScript. Well, not exactly JavaScript, it is based on TypeScript. TypeScript is the main language that is used in Angular scripts, and TypeScript is basically a superset of JavaScript. And we'll get into what TypeScript is later on. So basically, the fact that it is based on JavaScript makes it much more common and easy to reach out for developers like us. After that, we just discussed that Angular is meant for single-page applications. So we are not trying to create multi-page applications with Angular. Angular is made for making single-page applications. So what exactly is a single-page application? Well, it does not require a page reloading. So for example, Gmail is a wonderful single-page application. So let me just go ahead and show it to you. So if you go ahead and open up your Gmail account, and let's say you are straight up going to open on the inbox page. Now, if you were to go into drafts, let the site stop loading. Okay, so if you were to go into drafts, you see that there is basically no loadout here. Your screen isn't going into that whole whoop-de-whoop of loading. But if you are not on a single page application, for example, GoToWebinar, which is a recording service. So out here we are on the My Webinar tab. And if I were to go to my recording out here, you see that this goes into a loading fashion. This is loading up a new page. So this means that GoToWebinar is not a single page application, while Google is a single page application. And you just saw how much faster Google can be. My God, this is still loading and Google was done with it already. So yeah, single page applications certainly have the performance and the speed that you require today to do all your things very seamlessly. So it's great to have a framework that lets you create single page applications with so much ease. Okay, so that was all about Angular and what you need to know about it to actually go ahead and start developing apps using Angular. Now, another elephant in the room is Angular 8. Most people I actually teach Angular are very flustered with the fact that Angular is on version 8 at this moment. They are mostly flustered because they think they have to go through everything from version 2 to version 7 and then learn 8. Well, that is not the case. First of all, Angular was released as Angular JS, and Angular JS was the very first release, and everything changed with Angular 2 itself. The whole engine changed, how Angular written is changed. So basically, the major overhaul was done in Angular 2. And since Angular 2, after every 6 months, Google actually releases an update to Angular. And since then, it's been like Angular 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, and now we're at 8. So those many half years that have gone. So it's basically been 4 years, I guess, if my math is correct. So now we're at Angular 8, and every update that they make out there is basically backwards compatible. So think you've learned Angular 5, well, you can still work with Angular 8 because most of the stuff that's been changed are backwards compatible. So now that being out of the way, let's go ahead and see what is new in Angular 8. Now, if you're a beginner to Angular, most of this will not exactly make sense to you, so I recommend you skip it. Please use the timestamps that are there in the description to skip to the next topic, and that is the project setup. And that'll be way more interesting for you. But if you're a guy who is tech savvy and likes to know what he's working with, what's new in that version, well, this part's for you. So Angular 8 came with a few changes and one breaking change. Most of Angular updates have a few breaking changes. So the changes that are very relevant in Angular 8, firstly, is the IV engine. So Angular uses a visual rendering engine, and that is going to be replaced with Angular IV. It is still in its testing phases, to be honest. It's a beta release in Angular 8. It'll become very much prominent in Angular 9, I guess. So IV is the most hyped thing out there because your visual rendering API remains unchanged. So basically, you don't need to change your code, but the way it gets rendered is completely different. It's faster, much more optimized, and it's basically a breeze to work with. The next thing that's new in Angular is the Bazel engine. So Bazel is your way of orchestrating how your dependencies are there. So basically, it's like Webpack, but don't get this confused. It's not going to be replacing Webpack. Webpack is the god out there, but it is going to make Webpack's job a lot more easier. It's going to orchestrate and really serialize out what dependency you need to actually build your projects. So the coolest feature of Bazel is that it has a very smart algorithm for determining the build dependencies and injecting them into your project. Another thing that is cool about Angular 8 is differential loading. So this is just to make sure that there is a different type of loading for legacy browsers and the modern browsers out there. So basically, the modern browsers use modern JavaScript and the legacy ones use legacy JavaScript. So basically, there is a load time difference, and when you are using legacy JavaScript, it tends to be a little slower, while modern ones are way faster. They're much more quick to even write as a developer's perspective. So differential loading, the Bazel engine, and IV. So these are the three changes that are there in Angular 8. There is also a very breaking change in Angular 8. I have not listed that out here. Well, that has to do with the HTTP library. So to invoke the HTTP library, you would mostly have to import Angular/HTTP, but that has been changed, and that is the most breaking change. And that to now use the HTTP libraries, you have to import @Angular/common/HTTP. And if you've used HTTP before, you know what I'm talking about. So with that out of the way, this is all the theory part. Let's go ahead and start up with our own Angular project. So the first thing that you need to do is to start up with Angular is go ahead to your browser, open up a new tab, and search for Node.js. Now, I am assuming that you don't have Node.js installed on your computer, so click on the first link and go ahead and download the one that is recommended for most users. After you download it, you'll get a setup file. Go ahead, click the setup file, and just follow the instructions. It's a pretty easy install, and I don't think there should be much problems with it. But just in case out there you get a problem with it, some configuration problem goes wrong, please go ahead and check out another video that actually explains how to install Node.js on your computer. Because this video is meant for Angular, I have a lot to do, and I can't waste time with stuff like how to install Node. There are a lot of videos out there, including Edureka's itself, and you can go ahead and check them out. Now, once you have installed Node on your computer, you can go ahead and check if Node is installed by just typing Node on your command prompt, and this should open up a JavaScript console. You can say stuff like print, or let's say var x equals 5, and if you just call x, it'll say 5 out there. I know my text isn't very clear because I have this weird blue background in my command prompt, but yeah, if you can open up a JavaScript console with just typing Node, you have installed Node in proper fashion. Now to exit from this console, you can just type .exit, and that will exit you from that console. So now let's go ahead and clear up our command prompt. And the next thing that we are going to do is install Angular on our computer. So to install Angular, let's see what we have to do. So the best place that you have for any doubts of this sort is the Angular documentation. So go ahead and search for the Angular docs. So this will open up the Angular docs. It's at angular.io/docs. Go ahead and check the setup part. So out here you see that you need Node.js. Now that you have done it, you can go ahead and install Angular through an npm command. So npm is a node package manager, and all you have to say to npm is that you need to install. So install, or you can just simply say I and then -g, which basically means that it is going to be a global install and not pertaining to any particular folder or any project setup. So we are going to be installing this globally so that you can access the Angular CLI from almost anywhere on your computer. So after that, all you have to say is Angular/CLI, if I'm correct. Okay, it's @Angular. So for stuff like this, always keep the documentation open, and you should go ahead and press enter after that. So this command will go ahead and install Angular on your local machine. So let's just wait for this to finish. Okay, so as you guys know, I already had Angular installed on my computer, so nothing new has actually been changed. It just says it updated one package, so that doesn't really matter. So this means that Angular has been installed on our computer. And you can go ahead and check that by just creating an Angular project. Now I'm in my default user directory, so let me just go ahead and change it to the desktop directory. And out in the desktop directory, I want to make a folder called Angular tutorial. So Angular underscore tutorial. So this is where I'm going to be saving all the projects and all the setups that we will be needing for the various assignments and simple applications that we will be looking at and the concepts. So this is going to be the folder for the day. So let's go ahead and quickly change into that folder. And so Angular tutorial, and we are in our Angular tutorial folder. So out here, what you can do to start up a new Angular project is, as you guys can see, out here it says to create a workspace and initial application. You can use the ng new command. So ng new basically tells Angular CLI that you want to start a new project, and then you basically give your project a name. Okay, so ng new, and what do we name our project? Well, let's think of some appropriate name. Let's go back and see what are we actually going to do next. So we are going to be writing our first app. So it's very simple that we are going to be calling this our first app. So ng-new will go ahead and create folder which has everything that you need to create your first app. So you can opt out for routing for now because we will not be going for routing in this tutorial. And we will also be using CSS for our file. So just press enter twice and that will be using the default settings for setting up your Angular project. And there it goes. So that completes our project setup. And for this project setup, we are also missing out one thing. So firstly, we are missing out our code editor. So I'm going to be using Visual Studio Code, but you can use other paid applications like WebStorm out there. WebStorm is amazing. If you can pay for it, please go for it. But for now, for a very free way of making a tutorial, I'm going to be sticking to my cheap ways and just use Visual Studio Code. Now, just because Visual Studio Code is free doesn't mean it takes away from any of the functionalities that come from the paid apps. It has all the functionalities like syntax highlighting for creating and generating components. It's really good. You even get a built-in terminal to actually run your Angular CLI commands. Okay, so let's just wait for this project to get set up. It kind of takes a couple of minutes from some time. So let's just give it some time. Okay, so now that our Angular app is set up and running, all we need to do now is go ahead and just download Visual Studio Code. So to download Visual Studio Code, go ahead and type in Visual Studio Code on your browser. Go to the first link and also the second link out here that download Visual Studio Code. That should give you a setup file and you should just go ahead and set it up. That's very easy to do. So let's not waste more time and get started with writing our first app. Okay, so out here, if you were to go to your desktop and if you made a folder like me, like Angular tutorial, you will see that there's a folder that says first app. Now, if you were to open the folder, you see a lot of things you probably don't understand out here. So there is a TS-lint, which is a JSON source file. There's also the package file. There's a package lock. There's also this very important angular.json file, which basically includes all your dependencies. Now, this E2E file is not really going to be useful for us in this Angular tutorial. E2E basically means end-to-end, and this is made for end-to-end testing of Angular apps. What we are going to be interested in is mostly the node modules and the SRC. So out here in SRC, you see that there is this index page. There is an index page, which is your HTML file. There's also this style sheet, which is your basic styling of the web app that comes built in when you basically make any Angular app. So first of all, let's go back and let's open this folder particularly with Visual Studio Code. So as you guys can see, I have opened up our first app and we can go into our SRC and we can see that there's an app folder and we get a lot of files out here. So we have an app component.css file, we have an app component.html file, we have an app component.spec.ts file. So all of these .spec.ts files are basically used for testing purposes. We're not going to be concentrating on testing, but rather more on developing an app. So this is none of our concern for now. You can feel free to actually go ahead and delete it. Now, if you go ahead and open up app.component.ts, you can go ahead and see that there is a bit of code written out here. So there's an import line from the first thing. We can see that it's importing something called components from a library called Angular/core. There's also this decorator out here that tells Angular that this is a component. It has a selector, it has a template URLs, it has styles URLs. In the class, you can see that there is a variable that says title and it says first app. Now, this really doesn't make sense to a beginner, but just wait on when we will know what all of these things mean, from components to a class and everything else. So first of all, let's go ahead and see what this app that Angular ships with looks like. So to do that, go ahead and open up your terminal. You can simply do that by dragging it up and down. And out here, what you want to say is ng hyphen hyphen open, which basically makes your default browser open up. And all you want to say is serve. So this command basically serves the app that is in the development mode right now, and it will serve it on a local host at port number 4200. So it's compiling at the moment. So let's go ahead and see what it actually looks like. Let's give it some time to compile and should open up the app for us automatically. Let's close off this one. Let's keep the documentation open. Let's close off the Node.js. Let's close off my mail. Okay, so this is the first app. Okay, so as you guys can see, we are greeted with a welcome screen. As you guys can also see, it's on a local server. This is not hosted at a global scale. This is just for your testing purposes as a developer. So you can see that it says welcome to the first app. Now, if you go ahead and see out here, it says title equals first app. Now, if you go ahead in the HTML part, you can also see that there is this little place where title is referenced back again. So as a developer, I think you can make some sense that these three files, the app-component.ts, the app-component.html, and the app-component.css, is kind of interconnected with each other. So yeah, this is basically what an Angular app looks like. Okay, so this is basically the application that Angular ships with. It's a very welcoming application. It says, welcome to first app. It has some useful links, such as the Tour of Heroes link. It has a link to the command line interface documentation and a few of the Angular blogs. Now, this is of really no use to us if you want to learn. So let's go ahead and actually fiddle around with this file that comes along with Angular when you create your app. So if you go ahead and look at the app-component.html page, it looks deceivingly similar to what we see on our screen out here when with this app that Angular ships with. So as you guys can see, it has an H1 that says welcome to and title, and out here you can see welcome to first app. So basically we can say that the title out here, which we saw in the TypeScript file, which is said title equals to first app, and that gets converted out here. Above that, we also have a few links, and basically it's an unordered list. And also, if necessary, there is some styling that goes along too. But at this moment, there is no styling that is available. So let's go ahead and tinker around with this application just to give you an idea how Angular actually works. So Angular is basically divided into components, an Angular app. So out here, what you see is the app component. So every component has three files. It's basically it's a template. So it has its own styling. So that is app.component.css. It also has its template. So the styling is CSS. The template is app.component.html. And the logic, the business logic that goes inside this thing is in the app.component.ts file. Now, there is also this app.module.ts file, and I'll get to that just in a moment. But for now, what you want to do is go ahead and just delete all the stuff that is there in the app.component.html file. Now, don't forget to keep your terminal running, which is serving this application. So every time you go ahead and save, it basically saves it, and you can go ahead and see that it has reloaded it, and we have nothing out here, to be honest. So let's make this page a little more interesting. So firstly, let's give this just an input, let's say. So we want a div, and in this div, we are going to have an input of type text. Now, every input should also go with a label, and this label is for name. So we can give this type name equals name out here. Right, so let's make this a little less confusing for you guys. Let's call this first name, right? And out here, you see if we go ahead and save it, we should get an input out here. We can type stuff out here, but it really does nothing even if we press enter and stuff like that. So we can also have a paragraph out here, which outputs out our name for us. Please don't pay much attention to the syntax for now. Just try and understand what is happening in the background, because we will get to the syntax just in a few moments. So we want to display the name out here. So to display the name, we need to create a variable called name. So go ahead and go to your app.component.ts file and change this name, the title, to name. And out here, let's change it to my name. So we're going to say Arya. So let's save that. Let's go back and save our HTML file. And as you guys can see, Arya is coming out here. But if we still type something into the input, nothing actually happens. Now what I want to do is, whatever I type in the input should automatically be reflected in this paragraph below it. So we can do that very simply with so-called tool that Angular ships with. Now these tools are called directives, and we will get into directives just in this tutorial. I'll be teaching you how to make use of inbuilt directives like the one I'm going to be using right now. So let's go ahead and use this directive. Now pay no attention to the way I am writing this because syntax is something that can be dealt with later on. So for now, what we want to do is start a square bracket and then an open parentheses bracket. That is the normal bracket. And what we want to say is ng model is equals to name. So name should be in your double quotes. Now this will tell Angular that whatever is being typed out here is going to be stored in a property called name. And we are also going to be displaying the same name down here in this paragraph. So let's go ahead and save this. And let's go ahead and reload our file. And you surprisingly see that the input part that we had has suddenly disappeared. Now what we want to do to realize our mistake is go ahead and say inspect. If you go into the console, it says uncut error, template parse error. So it can't bind to ng model since it isn't known property of input. Okay, so basically Angular can't figure out what ng model is. Now this is because we have not imported the functionalities of ng model. Now I said that this is an input model and it comes shipped with Angular. But the way TypeScript works is that you have to go and tell TypeScript everything you are importing that you will be needing for your app to be running. Now all your imports to this is actually done in the module file. So things that need to be imported when you are running this is done in the modules file. So as you guys can see, we are importing a few stuff already that is by default. So we are importing the ng module from angular/core, and we are also importing the browser module from angular/platform browser. Now, to actually make the magic of ng model happen, we need to import something, and this is @angular/forms. So everything ends with a semicolon. So basically in TypeScript, you need to tell TypeScript where everything is particularly. So angular/forms. And what we need to import is the forms module. Now, this was telling TypeScript that we are going to be using this, but you also need to tell Angular that your forms module needs to be imported. So you can do that by just copying this name and putting it in the imports array out here. So put a comma, you press enter, and type in forms module. Go ahead and save your HTML page also, just in case. And now what we see out here is we do not get any error first of all, and we have this nice little input box. So let's close this. We also have this nice little input box. It says ARIA in the paragraph. It also says ARIA in the input box. Now, if I were to delete that, everything in the paragraph also automatically gets deleted. So if this was not a single page application, for example, reflecting the changes you made to the input would probably take you to reload the page. But that is not with Angular. You can go ahead and simply type your name and everything will happen like it's magic and it'll appear down in the paragraph below. So that was all about installing Angular, setting up your project, and we set up a project. We saw how the shipping app actually looks like, and then we kind of fiddled with it. And this is how an Angular app basically works. You have components, and then you also have modules. So modules are like sub packages, like any app would be divided into sub packages. An Angular app is divided into modules. Now modules contain components, and this is the component out here that we worked with just now. It is called the app component. Also, another thing that I want to bring to your notice is if we go ahead and open up the source code, what you see out here is it's basically an HTML page, but there's this weird app root element out here. It almost seems like we have built our own custom element. Below that, what you see is a bunch of script imports that Angular does for you so that Angular works properly. But the main interesting part is this app-root element. Now, if you remember, we had seen this app-root element in our app.component.ts file, and we see that we have a selector called app-root. Now, the page that gets loaded into the browser is actually this index.html page. Now, out here, you see that we have created this app-root thing. So basically, app-root out here is like a selector. So basically, this will help you understand how an Angular app gets loaded when we get to that. So index.html is basically the file or the source code that you see out here. It also happens to have this app root custom element. Now we built this custom element using our components, and we told our component that the selector for this custom element will be app root. And the template of that component is stored in app.component.html, which is basically this file. And also the component has some styling, which it at the moment doesn't have any. If it would have any styling, it would be in this app.component.css file. And basically that's it. And we have our app.component.ts file, which makes sure of the logic that is working properly. So basically this is how Angular works. It's a bunch of components. Now let's go ahead, and this was our first app that we created. Now let's go ahead with our next topic, and that is what is TypeScript. Now, you really saw that we are using something a little different from JavaScript. It's basically not JavaScript, it's TypeScript. So what exactly is TypeScript? Well, TypeScript is just a superset of JavaScript. It is a strongly typed, object-oriented compiled language. It was designed by Microsoft, and it is basically a superset to JavaScript. So anything that is included in JavaScript is definitely included in TypeScript, but the reverse can't be actually said. So everything in JavaScript is there in TypeScript because it is a superset, but everything in TypeScript is not there in JavaScript. So TypeScript is basically used when you want to create a JavaScript-based application that can actually scale at an industrial level. Because when we're talking about TypeScript, it basically compiles down to JavaScript, and this compilation is done by the Angular CLI. So if you want to go ahead and learn the nitty-gritties of TypeScript, you can go ahead and check out TypeScript tutorial out there on the web. There are plenty of them. TypeScript is really easy to learn. And even if you don't want to learn TypeScript, I think it's easy enough. If you know JavaScript, you can catch it up along the way. It's basically like JavaScript, but having classes, interfaces, and stuff like that. So with that out of the way, we can move ahead to our next topic, and that is integrating external CSS into our Angular application. Okay, so for the purpose of integrating an external CSS, we are going to be working with Bootstrap 3. So Bootstrap, if you don't know, is a CSS framework. So let's go and see what Bootstrap does. So this is Bootstrap. We are on Bootstrap version 4 right now, but I will be using version 3 for this purpose of this demo. So you can go ahead and see what Bootstrap does out here on Bootstrap's official site. I also have a Bootstrap tutorial. You can go ahead and check that out too. I'll leave a link to that in the description below. It's basically will show you how to use Bootstrap in its various forms and formats. Okay, so now we are only going to integrate Bootstrap into our project. So to do that, all you have to do is go out here and open up another PowerShell command. Out here, what you want to do is type in the commands npm install and -- save, and you want to say bootstrap @3. What this will do is download all the files of Bootstrap 3 and store it in this node modules folder. So node modules folder is anything that you use from the node package manager. If you download some external package, it will be saved in your node modules. After that, after it's downloaded, I will show you how you can integrate it into your project that you are working on. Let's give it some time to actually download the node modules, or what we have here, that is Bootstrap 3. Okay, so we have actually downloaded Bootstrap 3. Now you can check that by actually opening the node modules folder and going down till BOO. So A, B, C, D, B, should be somewhere here. Okay, it seems I can now find it there. Let's go ahead and check it out on our desktop. So we have Angular tutorial, first app, node modules.
and there should be a bootstrap out here. Yep, below bonjour. So it should be below bonjour. So let's go ahead and find bonjour out here. So this is our bootstrap folder that we had just downloaded. Now out here we have a few folders. So under this bootstrap folder, go into the dist folder that stands for distribution, go to CSS, and all you have to do is copy this, right click on it, and copy the relative path. Now all you have to do is go into, let's minimize this a little so that it becomes easier to work with. Now all you have to do is go out here, go into styles. This is the angular.json file. On almost line number 27, you will see that there is a styles array. So out here, all you do is put a comma, press enter, and put in the address of the bootstrap.css file. Now beware that when you copy the relative path, you have to actually go ahead and change this all to a backslash. So just change all of these to backslashes and you should be ready to go. So let me just show you guys. This is without actually having Bootstrap installed. So this is the app that we have created. Now, if we were to just go ahead and inspect, we can go ahead and see that in the head part, there is only one style that it says text/CSS. This other styles is just a way of telling Angular that there's a source mapping of all the CSS styles. Now, at this moment, you can see that this is the global styles to this file. Now, once we actually go ahead and save our angular.json file, and then what we have to do is actually go ahead and node where we were actually serving, hit Control C, and then what you want to do again is serve it again. So basically save your angular.json file, stop serving your application onto the server, and then save all your files, and then start up a new fresh serve process again. So to start a new fresh serving process, all you have to do is go ahead and type ng new, or you can just say n. Oh wait, we're not creating a new component. All we want to do is say ng-o and serve. So remember, this has only one style at this moment. So now let's see how we can actually integrate Bootstrap if we actually could integrate Bootstrap into our project. Okay, so our application has actually compiled, and let's go ahead and see. Let's go ahead and inspect our page. And if you go into your head part, you will see that there is a new style that has been added. So this says that Bootstrap version 3.4.1 has been added, and now you can use all the styling that comes along with Bootstrap. For example, if I were to put this division inside a class called Jumbotron, this would give it a specific type of styling. A Jumbotron is not exactly meant to be used like that, so let's go ahead and change it to a container. Now, if you want to know about all these Bootstrap classes that I'm using, you can very well go ahead and check out my Bootstrap tutorial that I have up on Edureka's site. Okay, so let's remove this. We are not doing the styling properly at this moment. Let's get back to this. Okay, looks like we have actually broken something, but what I wanted to show you is that we actually have Bootstrap going on and our Bootstrap is completely working. So this is Bootstrap version 3.4.1 for us. So that is, guys, how you would add an external CSS file to your project. Okay, so our next topic for today is how Angular actually loads. So if we go back to our code editor and we analyze all the files that we've seen. So first of all, you have three component files. That is the component styling file, the component template file, and the component TypeScript file. Now, if you were to go back to your page where your application is loaded and you were to inspect it, or to be honest, you have to go and see the source. So in the source, you see that there is this app root element. Now, how does the app root element know that it has to insert an input box and a paragraph out here? Well, let me just explain that first, because this is a very important concept. This will help you in learning Angular because you're getting to the root and fundamentals of how Angular is working. So firstly, the page that is getting served by the ng serve process is this index.html file. Now in this index.html file, we have somewhat of a custom element with the selector of app root. Now, if you would realize, we have tied in this app root selector out here in this app.component.ts file. In this app.component.ts file, we have a decorator method. We have a decorator class, I'm sorry. And in this decorator class, we have said that the selector is going to be app root. Basically, it saves a string as a selector, and it gives it a value that this is going to be used for recognizing an element on an HTML page. We have then also said that the element will have its templating in an app.component.html file. So very basically, when an app root component is present on your HTML file, Angular knows that it has to serve these three files out here. These three files out here, the app component files, it knows because it's tied in with the selector. Now, if you go ahead and see it out here, there is a module file also. Now, before we get to the module file, I'd like to tell you that the first piece of code that is actually run is always the main file. So out here, the main file is the main.ts file, and out here you see this line out here. So out here in this file, basically there are a few imports. One is to enable production mode for development purposes, but the most important line out here is platform browser dynamic, and it's a bootstrap module. So in this bootstrap module, we are passing in the app module as an argument. So since the app module is being passed as an argument, the app module part is actually invoked out here. And out here you see it has another bootstrap array. So this bootstrap doesn't actually refer to our bootstrap CSS framework we just included. Bootstrap means what should be run first when you are actually running an application. So out here we are saying that we want to run the app component, and the app component here happens to have this HTML file, the CSS file, and this TypeScript file, which are also tied into the index.html, which is app root selector. So whenever this app root selector is found on this HTML page, it is going to actually serve these three files, and that is exactly how an Angular app is loaded onto your screen. So this workflow is very important for you to understand, such that you know where you are going wrong, just in case in future debugging processes. We will be having a very detailed lecture on debugging in the future, so please hang on for that. So this part that I just explained will act as a precursor of knowledge for the future videos, which will need you to understand how an Angular application is actually being presented to you on your screen. Now moving ahead, we are going to go ahead to our next topic, and that is components. Now what we have here under this app folder is a component. Now components are the building blocks of Angular. Everything that you see on your screen using Angular is basically a component. So imagine there is this website that you see on your mobile phone, and it is a website built by Angular. Now everything on Angular will be starting with the root component, and they will obviously contain subcomponents and even more subcomponents after that. So basically it is a tree of components. Now if you would remember my Flutter tutorial, if you haven't watched that, please go ahead and check that out. Flutter is amazing and you should be learning it today. Well, in Flutter I had said that application built using Flutter is a tree of widgets. Now, the same analogy can be put to a web page that is built using Angular as a tree of components. It's basically a unit or a building block, and each framework it gives its building blocks a different name. So for Flutter, it's a widget, and for Angular, it's a root component or just components in itself. So what we did out here is that we had a component. Now let's say that we want to create another component. How do we do that? Well, all you have to do is go ahead and right click on your applications folder. And what you want to say is you want to put in a new folder. Now let's call this folder, let's say we want to have a component called servers. So let's call this servers. And out here, what we want to do is we want to create the server files. So out here, we are going to create a new file. So we are going to create a new file, and this file is going to be called the server.component.html. So why did we choose this naming process? Well, when you are building an industry level applications, you tend to forget what is what. So naming something appropriately. So out here, you know that this is the server.component.html file. This gives us very good information. For example, it is a server, it is a component, and this is the template HTML file. Now in this template HTML file, we could be putting anything. For example, let's just put an H3, and we could say that this is the server component that you are viewing. So if this is coming on our screen, we will know that this is a server component. Now we also need to add a new file out here. So to serve this file, we need a TypeScript file first of all. So what we need to do is create a new file, and this will be the server.component.ts file. So TS stands for TypeScript. Now, if you were to go ahead and check out the app component.ts file out here, you see that there is an import and then there's a class. So first of all, we are going to try and replicate this because that is also a component and we are making our component manually, so we will know what we want to do. So first of all, we want to say export class, and let's say server. Out here, let's see the naming fashion of how it is used. So it says app component. So to make it more clear that this is a component, we could just use something of a naming structure like server component. Those are brackets. Now we said export because we want to be using this class everywhere else. So this was your way of telling Angular that this is a component. But this is not where it actually ends. You also need to tell Angular by actually putting a decorator. So @component will tell Angular that this is indeed a decorator. So out here, if you were to go ahead and again look into your components file, out here you see that we have to open the components part and type in the selectors. Now basically what we want to put in this component is we want to say how we want to select this. So we're going to say selector, and our selector will be, let's say, a server. I'm sorry, that's not how you do it. Let's just go back. And as you guys can see, our things are becoming much more easier because of this IDE. Things are getting imported into our file system. Now what we want to say out here is our selector will be, we have to pass a string, so it is going to be server. Now we can actually call this a server, but that is not the proper naming fashion. So just to make sure your selector doesn't actually go ahead and clash with any inbuilt selector or some selector that might probably ship with Angular, what you want to do is call this app server. So you just put a hyphen in between and you call this app server. Now another thing that we need to do is pass the HTML file. So we can say template URL. So let's see how we can actually use the template URL part. So you see that it is a template URL and we have to pass in the components.html. So out here, let's go back and let's say template URL, and all we have to do is pass server.component.html. Now let's see if we are missing out on anything. You can always go back and check there. So we have to put the dot and the slash just to tell it that it is in the same parent directory. So dot slash server.component.html. And for now, we can skip on the styling because there is no styling involved. So we do not put a semicolon here because this is basically like an array. So let's go ahead and save that. So that saved successfully. And now what we can do is go back into our app component file, an HTML file. Let's go ahead and delete all this. Now what we can say is, let's put an H1 to know that we are in the app component file. So this is app component that we are looking at. Now, if you guys remember, we have used a selector out here, that our selector for this will be app server. So whenever we put an app server type of selector, then H3 should be rendered, which says this is the server component that you are viewing. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's go back to our app component and let's say app server. So since we have put our app server here, what we should be able to do is, so since we have put an app server there, an H3 should be actually rendered there. Now let's go ahead and check if that actually happens. Let's save all our files. Let's save that. Let's save this. Now what you see out here is nothing is actually getting loaded. There is no H1 and there is no S3 either. Now this is because we have forgotten to actually put it in our modules. So if we see that nothing is actually getting loaded, there is no H1, there is no H3. So let's go ahead and inspect, and let's go into the console. And if you go ahead there, you'll see that app server is not a known element. And the beautiful part of Angular is that it also gives you a solution most of the time. So if app server is an Angular component, then verify that it is a part of this module. So this gives us an idea that there is something missing in the app modules part out here to know that what this actually does. So if we were to look at our app modules TypeScript file, we would see that there it kind of looks like a normal TypeScript file. There are a bunch of imports in the beginning. Then there is a decorator, which is the ng module decorator, and it has a bunch of arrays. Now in these arrays, we have understood what the bootstrap part does. It basically tells which component should be loaded or which service should be loaded when our app is loading for the first time. Now, we also need to tell Angular that there is another component that you should be aware of. This is not done automatically if you are creating your servers and components manually. So what we need to do is go ahead and tell Angular that there is a server component. So if we put a server component, we also see that there is another import line that has been added. So out here, this is TypeScript. This is the way you tell TypeScript that there is a server component, and this is the way you tell Angular that there's a server component. Now, if we were to go ahead and save that, we can now see that there is two parts loaded. One says that app component, and the other said this is the server component that you are viewing. If we were to go ahead and inspect, you would see that this is the head, then this is the body, and inside the app root, we will have the app server component that is running. Inside the app server, we see that there is an h3, which is basically this part. So this is how you can create your components manually and then add them to your project and add them successfully too, so that Angular and TypeScript both understand how your components are being made. Now, you can also add a styling to your components by just adding a styling folder, I mean a styling file. So you will be calling this the server.component.css. So this is going to be a CSS file, and out here we can just say, since we have an h3, we can say color will be, let's say, blue. Let's go ahead and save that. And now what we need to do is go into the TypeScript file, and we also need to give the styles URL, and this is going to be, so let's go ahead and see how styles are actually put. This is put in an array, so that's exactly what we're going to do out here. So what we want to say is, let's just copy this out because it's going to be the CSS file in the similar fashion. Let's go ahead and paste that in and just change this to CSS. Let's go ahead and save that. And now if we go ahead and load it, we will see that our styling has also been applied to our component. So this is the server component, this is the app component, which makes it very clear. Now, if you are actually a guy who likes things to be much more automatic and seamless like me, worry not, because Angular gives you the power to create components and not worry about if they're included in your module and everything just through the CLI. So if we were to go to our PowerShell part and we were to actually run a command that says ng generate component, and we could say, let's say, so we have a server, so we need somebody to, let's say, sub server. So sub server. Now what the CLI will do is it will go ahead and create everything that you need for your component. So we see we have a subserver folder out here. This subserver has a subserver.css file, and this also has a subserver.component file. Now only we can go and put this. So it has a component file, has a paragraph that says subserver works. There's also the testing file, which we didn't create. There's also the components file out here. I mean the TypeScript file. And as you guys can see, it says app sub server. So that is a selector that you use it with. So let's go ahead and use this. So we go ahead and put this into our server's HTML file, and we can just say app sub server. Let's go ahead and save that. And now what you should see is that there is a sub server works out here. So basically what you did was you created a component through the CLI, and you basically just used it. This is how you are going to be using most of your components, creating most of your components, and that is through the CLI. I just wanted to show you how you can do it manually too, just so that you know how a server is written, I mean how a component is written, and what each line of code means when a component is also written. Now, if you were to go ahead and compare this, there is a constructor function and there is this ng-on init. We will get to these parts later in our playlist. Because for now, if I were to go into the nuances of ng-on init and a constructor, it would only create chaos and confusion in your mind. So that was about components for now. So it's time for our first assignment. Okay, guys, so that is how you use and create components using the Angular CLI. Now, coming back to the server component that we created, I would like to bring to your notice a few different things that you can do. So first of all, let's go ahead and analyze the selector part. So if you have any experience with web development, you will know that a selector is basically a way of selecting stuff or elements on your HTML page. Now, when we say app server like this out here, this could be anything. This could be a property, this could be a class, or this could be an HTML element too. For now, this is an HTML element. But let me just show you this can also be used as a class. So let's see. We say it's .app server, and let's go ahead and save that. So this is going to be .app server. Now let's go ahead and find where we actually used our server. So we have used the app server like this. Now if we were to comment this out, and let's say we put in a div that had a class and it said app server. Now as you see, this is the server component that you are viewing and the subserver works. So let's go ahead and inspect that. Let's go into the body. That's the app root. And then there's a div which has a class app server instead of an app server component. So what we did was that we created an app server and we made the class a selector. So the selector is basically a class now. Now the class can also have its own styling, and that is basically how you do it. Now, instead of actually writing your template URLs like this, you could also, let's comment this out, you could also say something like a template. So your template could be just a template, and you are going to put your template in these quotes. Now, this could be something like subserver. Okay, so this will basically put the app subserver in this template. So instead of a template URL, you could be using a template too. And instead of your styles URL, basically you can do some inline styling. Now, before we go ahead with our next topic, what I would like you all to do is solve an assignment for me. So this assignment will test how good you are at creating your components. So let's go back and just change everything back to the way it was. So let's save it. Save this. Let's save this. Save everything. So out here we can just say app server again. And now that creates an app server for us. Okay, so this is save. And now I want you guys to do a basic assignment actually. So let me just write down the instructions for the assignment. Okay, so for your first assignment, this is exactly what you are going to do. So as you guys can see on the screen, I have put down 3 instructions. So first of all, what you have to do is create 3 components called red, green, and yellow. Now we have to use them in the app component part, and then we have to give them some appropriate styling and probably an appropriate message. So you guys can pause the video out here and go ahead and try and create these 3 components, and then come back if you actually are successful or not also, and check out the solution that I will provide you guys. Okay guys, so that was the first assignment I just gave you all. So I hope you guys had paused the screen when I told you that I'm giving you guys an assignment, and I hope you guys actually try to solve it, because in this part we are going to try and solve the assignment I just gave you. So this part you can use to see how correct you were. Well, it was a pretty easy assignment, so I hope most of you guys got it, because that means I could successfully teach you how to actually use components. So for the solution, we have created out here Angular folder that says assignment 1, and it has nothing in it. So let me just go ahead and open it with Visual Studio Code. Out here, if I were to go ahead
and go to my source folder, into the app folder, and just go ahead into the spec.ts, into the TypeScript file rather, and we were to go ahead out here and I were to serve this, you would see that there is nothing. Okay, so if we were to just serve this file out here, you would see that it is the normal application that ships with Angular. So let's just ng open and serve. Okay, so as you guys can see, it says welcome to assignment 1, and this is the basic application that Angular ships with. Now what we're going to do is we're going to delete everything and we're going to start from scratch. Now let's go back and see what we actually wanted to do. So what we have to do was create 3 components called red, green, and yellow. So let's go ahead and do that first. So to create these elements, first of all, let's go ahead and delete all this garbage that we do not need. Save it again, and let's just keep the title. So to keep the title, just pay attention to what I'm doing. Keep the title. This is very, you don't need to do this to get the assignment correct. All you need to do is make the components. So this is just me being fancy with you guys. So this, or we could say welcome to assignment 1. Make this an H1 so that it looks better. Yeah, so welcome to assignment 1. So that's it. Now what we have to do is create 3 components. So to create 3 components, what we want to do is create a new terminal in Visual Studio Code so that we can create the components really easily. And out here we want to type ng generate component red. And we're going to do this for 3 different times. So we're going to have the red component, we're also going to have the blue component, and we're also going to have the yellow component. Now, since we're doing this with the CLI, our app.module automatically gets updated with red, blue, and yellow. Now, all we need to do out here is use them because that is the second part. We have to use them in app component. So our app component is out here. This is our app component. So what we can do is say app red. This will produce the red part. This will produce the app and blue part, and this will produce the app yellow. Let's go ahead and save this. Now what we see is red works, blue works, yellow works. So we have successfully created 3 components and we have put them in our app component part. Now what we need to do is give them their styling. So let's go ahead and go into these separate components. Let's open up their styling files. We want to say, because we already know that it's a paragraph that works there. So paragraph will have border of, so since this is the blue component, we'll give it a blue border. So it'll be 1px solid and blue. And maybe we can also turn the color to sky blue. I'm using very basic colors out here. Let's also copy this because we're going to be using a very similar type of styling for red and yellow. So let's go into red and let's paste that. We want this to be red and this to be crimson. And let's go into yellow and let's say the same thing. This is going to be yellow. We could use here, and we could also use another color, maybe a much more paler yellow. Let's keep it dark because fonts need to be dark actually. So let's save these. Let's save this file, let's save this file, and let's save this file. Now let's go back and see how it actually is working. So blue works, yellow works. We need to go and put up some more styling for the yellow part because that seems to be kind of going haywire. So let's go to yellow.css. Let's go here. So we have actually done this in the app component. Let's save this, go back to yellow.css, paste this out here, and let's save it. So now our yellow is yellow, our blue is blue, and our red are red. We can also add some new styling to them by adding a background color. So this is also going to be a yellow, or we can rather choose some different yellow maybe. Let's make it much paler on the yellow side. Let's copy this line, put in red component.css. Okay, so for red, we can choose something of pale red sorts. That makes it like that. And in blue, we can choose something of a blue sort.
So for blue, we could go for a paler blue, and that should be much more paler. Let's save all of this. Now let's see. So yeah, we have a blue background, a yellow background. Why isn't our red background working? We haven't saved it, it seems. And our red background is working too. So we have successfully completed our assignment 1. So I hope you guys are satisfied with the solution. I hope you guys could do it on your own too, so because that's exactly what matters. Okay, so now that we have learned about how components are the building blocks, we even made our own custom components, and we even did an assignment on one. So it's time we move on to the next topic, and that is data binding. So data binding is like communication. Well, what are we communicating? It's communication between your TypeScript file and your template. So basically your business logic and what basically the user sees. So suppose you click a button on a screen and you want to take some action according to that. Or you are retrieving some information from a calculation or from a server and you want to output that on a screen. Well, you do that with the help of data binding. Now, there are two types of data binding. The first one is string interpolation, and the second one is property binding. So this is the way of you outputting something onto the screen. So string interpolation and property binding. So let's go ahead and see how we can do them. So let's go back to our assignment that we had just done. So first of all, what we want to do out here is go to the modules, and we actually want to remove all these components. Let's go ahead and just remove these components. Let's go ahead and remove these imports. And then we can go ahead and just delete these files out. Let's delete that. Let's delete this. Let's also delete this. Now let's go back to our app component, and we have to remove these. So app module, we have to actually save this to. Now that we have saved it, we go ahead and see that it says welcome to assignment 1. Now out here you see that we are using this double curly braces, and this is string interpolation. So what does string interpolation mean? Well, it converts anything, any variable, any string like this into an interpolated format, and it shows it to you on the screen. So let me just give you a rather better example of a usage of string interpolation. So let's go back to our app component.html, and out here we want to say there is a paragraph, and in this paragraph we are outputting some server status. So let's say server is server with PID is offline. So we want to actually put out something like this. So at this moment it'll just simply say server with PID is offline. Right, but what if our server had a certain name? So server name, let's say dash 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 with PID dash 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 is at a status of dash dash dash. Let's see. Now what we need to do is go ahead and go into our app component.ts file. So that is our TypeScript file, and now what we're going to do is create a few of these variables that we need. So first of all is server name, and let's say the server name is Apollo. Okay, and we also need a server PID. So server PID is gonna be, let's say, 11. And we also need a server status. And then we can set the server status to offline. So this will be a string. So that's why we just surround them with our single quotes. So now we can say something like this on our components.html page. So if you remember, we were getting the title of our general application that ships in with Angular when you make a new Angular project. You see that it says, welcome to so-and-so application. So that was done with string interpolation. If you remember, it was the curly braces that held something like title in there, right? So out here, what we can do is put some variable or even a function that will return a string or anything basically that can be converted into a string, and that will be displayed out here between these curly braces. So what we can do is we can reference the server name. So server name is basically kept in like this.
And then with PID, so we can put the PID out here. So this is a number. So the number can also be converted into a string. So therefore, string interpolation will work in this process. And we can also put in the server status, of course. So we put in the server status by referencing the variable that holds the server status. Okay, so now we have done the string interpolation. So let's go ahead and see what our output looks like. So server name Apollo with PID 11, that is process ID 11, is offline. Now I had also said that we could put in a function out here. So let's go ahead and create a function. So in this function, we will basically toggle the server ID. So we can say toggle. So in this function, we will basically be toggling the server status. So we will say something like toggle server status, and this will return this dot server status equals to not. Okay, so what we do out here is for toggling this, we will say equals to false. So if it's false, let's just understand that it is going to be offline. We could put in some logic to say that false will print out offline, but let's not get into that for now. So we can say something like, or rather, let's not deal with this. Let's do it the way it should be done, not be lazy people. Now we can say there is a status flag and it is set to true, or false in this case because it is offline. Now this .server status flag will be made true out here. Server status equals to true. So we're going to make it true, or rather we could make it not of this .server status flag and status flag. Now that will work properly because this will basically convert it, and there should be no spaces out there. And we can say if this dot server status flag equals to true. So we can say if this dot status flag equals true, we have to open our braces and we'll say server status, this dot server status will be set to online. Okay, and there we go. And after this has been done, we can just return this dot server status, right? So basically what is happening out here is we have set a flag. Okay, missing white space, quick fix. So we can put in a triple equals just to make sure it's exactly true, and not only check the equivalence, that is, and also check the value. So out here what we are doing is we are setting a status flag to false, and according to that status flag we are changing the server status to online or offline. Okay, so now that we have put in this function, we can use that function by calling it in our string interpolation method. So just instead of putting a variable, we can put in the function, and this will change the server status to online. Now, basically, what we are doing here is really simple, is it's returning a string and it's being converted into a string. Okay, so now that we have toggled the server status to online, and we did that through passing a function in the string interpolation, so now let's understand how we can do property binding. So every HTML element has some property or the other. These properties list can be easily found on MDN, that is the Mozilla Developer Network. So let me just give you an example of a property. So let's say we had a button to toggle the server status further from offline to online again and again, instead of just being toggled from offline to online hard coded into the code. So let's say we had a button, and let's say this said toggle server status, right? So if we had something like a button like toggle server status, so we have a button like this out here, but it really doesn't do much at this moment. But let's say, just for the sake of showing property binding, let's say the button was disabled and you wanted this button to be actually enabled after 2 seconds that your website has loaded up, just so that there are no discrepancies in the button press. Okay, so we can achieve that by writing a constructor function in our class component. So out here you can make a constructor. So we can say set timeout. So we have to first give the time after which it will be enabled. So let's say 2.5 seconds. So it's 2.5 seconds, and now we have to put in a logic of actually turning this button to be enabled. So let's say we have a variable called button state. So button state at this moment should be true because our button is disabled. First it should stay disabled, and then it should get enabled. So we have to say this dot button state equals to false, right? So now that we have done that, all we have to do is go ahead and bind this property. So we do property binding by putting the property in between this square bracket and then binding it to the outcome of a variable or a function. So out here we can say we are going to bind it to button state. Okay, we need double quotes for this. I'm sorry, not single quotes. So button state. Now what is happening out here, after the constructor is going to get executed, our button state is going to become false. So disabled will become false, and first of all it will be true because the button state being true for the first 2.5 seconds. And actually let's see this in action. So our page is loading, and after 2.5 seconds our button becomes active. So let me just show that to you again. It's inactive for 2.5 seconds, and then it suddenly becomes active. So this is how you perform property binding. So what we just saw here is we saw string interpolation in action. We passed a string interpolation arguments with variable names, and we even did a function. Then following that, we did property binding. So for property binding, we first created a button so that we can toggle the server status, but we haven't really added that functionality yet. We are yet to do that. But what we did was we binded the disabled property of the button to a certain variable. Now this could have also been a function, and it will be the same way. You just pass in the function with the brackets and it'll work. And now what we will see is something that is our next topic, and that is event binding. So event binding is basically binding DOM events to certain logic that will reside in your TypeScript. So we want to bind our toggle server status that we had created out here, because we are basically toggling the server status and then returning the server status. So we can basically do that by passing an event. So every button has an event called click, and to click we will pass the event toggle server status with the brackets. Now this will become active after 2.5 seconds, and basically it's not working as we wanted it to. So let's go ahead and inspect it. Okay, so it's not working because we are toggling the server status out here, and what we want to do is return the server status. So it should actually work, to be honest. So this dot server status. So if we were to just output the server status out here. Okay, so we do not have a logic out here. So to make it back to go offline, so else we can just add something like else this dot server status equals offline. So now that we have set up our function to even display offline, and because we were first changing it back to online and there was no real logic to change it back to offline again. So now let's do that. And now we can have a toggling happening out here. So we can change it to online, we can change it offline. So now we have a button that can actually toggle our server status from online to offline and so forth and so on. So that was event binding and property binding. And we also saw string interpolation. So with the help of event binding and property binding, now we have a button that can actually make it offline and online. But there's another way that we can do this, and that is two-way binding. So for two-way binding, what we're going to see is basically we are going to combine property binding and event binding. So let's try and do that. So for event binding, let's go back to our code editor, and out here, let's go to our HTML page. And what we want to say out here, okay, so let's remove all this. So we can make this server information. So first of all, we can have a form. So basically we can have an input of type text, and this will take in, let's say, let's put a placeholder and let's put in server name. Let's also put a button below this, and this will be a submit button. Or rather, instead of a button, what we can do to show two-way binding is put in a paragraph, and we are going to type out our server name out here, and we are going to put in the server name here. So server name is going to be here. So this is basically string interpolation, and what I am interpolating is the server name that we had created. Okay, so this has a capital S, so let's not forget that. So our capital S should be out here. And what we are going to do is basically use ng model. So to use ng model, what you need to do is go into your app module out here. So in your app module, what you need to import is basically the forms module. So to import the forms module, you have to say import forms module from @angular/forms. So that's it, and we have to put this in single quotes. And out here, what we need to do is, let's go ahead and see what it's saying. Disable rule import spacing. So we basically imported the forms module, and this forms module will have a functionality called ng model. So ng model will let us bind whatever is being typed to be actually binded to a certain variable. So we can put that ng model property to our input. So this ng model will be binded as an event and also as a property. So we need to pass in the server name. So let's see, we have a server name called Apollo out here. So it's already pre-filled with Apollo. And let's say we want to name our server something else. So let's call it the Jigsaw. So Jigsaw could be the name of a server. And as you guys can see, it is being automatically updated out here. So that is two-way binding. So just to give you guys the difference between two-way binding and one-way binding, what we can do out here is say put a placeholder. So this is the same part. We will have server name. So what we can do is make another input, and this time around we are going to put ng model as just a property. So ng model with camel casing, and we are going to say it will be binded to server name. So let's bind it to server name and let's see what happens. So now we have two inputs and everything is filled with Apollo. Now if you see out here, if I go ahead and change Apollo out here, it is not automatically changing in the paragraph 2 because it is only one way binded. While out here, if we were to give the name Paul to our server, it would automatically update it everywhere. But if you were to go ahead and delete a little bit, it's not really updating it out here because it's not two-way binding. You need an event to actually go ahead and submit this so that your event and your property gets binded together, and basically you have two-way binding then. Okay, so that does it. And just to make this a little more interesting, let's make this something like h1. So we can put an h2 and let's say input server information. Okay, so once we have that ready, so we can say server name and the server ID will be the PID basically. So we have an input server name part, and then we can display server information out here. So display server information. What we can do is, let's just copy this out. So server PID, is it the server PID? I constantly forget. It's server PID, so that's why server PID will be presented, and server status. So now we basically have a small little server page going on, and we have a button that can toggle the server status. We have a place where we can input the server name. So what we just saw out here is basically we saw string interpolation. So all this output is being shown to you through string interpolation. We are binding a property to this button, and with the help of that, we are toggling it for the first 2.5 seconds. This is disabled now, and this will become enabled. Then we saw event binding, where we actually toggle the server status with the help of a button. And then we also saw two-way event binding, where we put in an input method or an input element, and we are constantly displaying what is there in the input with the help of two-way binding. So this brings us to our second assignment for today. And in this video, I would like to say that again, please try and solve the assignment on your own. And these are the instructions for your second assignment. So for assignment 2, what you have to do is create a page that can take the input of a first name using two-way data binding, and you have to output the name using string interpolation. So again, for using two-way data binding, remember you have to use ng model, and to use ng model, you have to go and import the forms module into your apps.module.ts file. And in that apps.module.ts file, you will also have to declare it out there. So don't forget to do all that. And in the output, you have to actually use string interpolation Then we have to add a button to reset the name to a blank string. So this should be something like property binding, I guess. I won't know until I solve it myself. And again, this button should be disabled if the name field is currently empty. So I would suggest that you pause the video right here and you go ahead and solve this. And if you can't solve it, you can always follow along with me because I will be coding to the solution of this assignment right now. So let's go back to our code editor, and what we're going to do now is try and solve assignment number 2. So I'm going to keep on editing the assignment project that we had made. I'm not going to make new assignment project. So what we're going to do is basically remove everything from here. Let's remove everything. We will also be needing some new logic. So this is not going to work for us. So let's go ahead and remove that. We also don't need a constructor function. We don't need anything. We just need the class to be there. And that's all. At this moment, I will also let ng module be there in our apps.module because we will be needing it. So I'm not going to edit this out. So let me just say that I have saved everything. And now all we have is a blank canvas that we can start developing on. So our first instruction says that we have to create a page that can take the input of the first name using two-way data binding. So let's see. We want the user to know that he is inputting his first name. So label, and this will be going to be for, it's going to be for first name. So we can say f name, something like this. And then we can say first name. And out here, what we can do is put an input that has type text, and it also has a name of f name. So the label is now binded to our input. This is how you should properly always code. We also should put in a placeholder even though we have a label, because that is just good practice. So we are going to say first name in the placeholder, and now we have a place that we can put in our first name in. So we can also put in a space out here. First name is going to be here, right? And we also need to input our first name in a paragraph according to the second instruction. So we can put it out in a paragraph, and we can use string interpolation for this, and we can just use a variable called name because we are only dealing with one name. There's no last name, so we can just create a variable called name. Now we go back to our TypeScript and we create a variable called name, and let's keep it blank for now. Okay, we are not going to use double quotes, we are going to use single quotes, and let's keep it blank for now. So now we can say our name, which should be displayed out here. So basically what we need to do is two-way binding. So that is pretty simple. We learned that really easily, that we can do this through the ng model, and we can bind it to the property of name, or rather the variable name that we just created. So out here we will have a name, and we can just go ahead and start typing now, and our name gets typed out here. Now, the other thing that we need to do is we need to add a button to reset the name to a blank string. So first, let's go ahead and create that button for ourselves. So we need a button, and this button should say reset name. And basically, it should have a function or an event whenever it's clicked. So whenever it's clicked, it should have a function that basically goes ahead and turns the name blank again. So we can have a function called reset name. So reset name is going to be our function. So let's go ahead and create that function now. So reset name is going to be our function, and what we want to do is set this dot name equals to blank again. We can actually do this without the event, I guess. So we can fix the missing white space. Let's see if we are actually, if you do reset name, it goes ahead and resets the name to blank. So we have binded it to an event, and that is the click event, and we need reset name out here. We are not passing anything because it is directly being binded to the property, or rather the event out here. So now we need to bind it to a property. So the property that we are going to bind it to is disabled. So the disabled property is going to now check a function basically to see if the name has any value or not. So this can be really easily done by actually saying something like name.length 0, but we are not going to try and add code out here, so let's just stick to the functions. Actually, we could actually have done a tertiary operation and basically done it in one line, but why do that? So let's see, check name. So check name is either going to return true or false. So now we have check name, and what we can say is if this dot name equals to, and we can also set state. So state is true. We are going to need the state variable to actually handle the disabled functionality. So if this dot name is equals to blank, what we want to say is this dot state will remain true. Or what we can do is, if it is unequals to this, what we can do is say this dot state equals to. So let's go over our logic again. So if our state is true, and if it is not an empty string, rather, we are going to turn our disable to false. So if it is false out there, what we need to do out here is say check name. Okay, so we made a mistake. We can't do that. Let's see, inspect, console, and template. Can't bind to disable since it isn't a known property of button. Okay, so disable is not the known property because it's disabled. So that was the silly error that we had made. Now let's see, let's go ahead and load it. Okay, so check name is not a function. Okay, so let's go ahead and use check name. We actually forgotten to save this out here. Go ahead and put the white space there. So now we have a button that can actually set the string to a blank string again. But according to our assignment, it says that this button should be disabled if the name is empty. So this way we can actually practice our property binding. So basically we have to bind the property disabled to a function that will basically return the state. So let's say it is a function that is called check name. And now let's go ahead and create this function. So check name is going to be our function, and put that in double quotes. Now let's go back to our app module out here. So let's create a state first. Now the state is going to be false first of all, and let's say we are going to have another function called check name, and in check name what we want to do is check whether, so we can do the checking part with an if statement. So this dot name, we are checking for the name if it is empty string, and if it is an empty string, what we want to do is make our button disabled, and that can be done by just returning true in our state variable. So we're going to set it to true and we are going to return it. So return this dot state. So if we return this dot state out here, we are going to have a button now that is basically disabled. Okay, first of all, we need to go ahead and check what we have done wrong. So we need to go ahead and save this. So check name is actually being passed. Now let's go ahead and reload that. So now we see that we have a button that is disabled, but as soon as we start typing, the button gets enabled and we can click it to basically put it back into disabled state, and also making the first name string into a blank string. So this is the solution to assignment number 2. I hope you guys had followed along with me, and if you had any doubts when solving it on your own, the doubts have been cleared now. Now let's move ahead and let's look at the last topic for our Angular basics today, and that is directives. So what exactly are directives? Well, let's head over to Angular's site and let's see what they are saying about directives. Well, it says that there are two kinds of directives out here. So one is attribute directive and one is a structural directive. So an attribute directive changes the appearance or behavior of a DOM element. So in short, a directive is basically an instruction to the DOM. Now this instruction may be to change the DOM due to some attribute, or it could structurally change the DOM too. So that is a structural directive. So structural directives are basically used in places where you want to input a certain, let's say a division, like out here, a division is being used with the directive ngIf, and we are outputting hero.name out here. So what this is basically there is an if statement, and we will get to what ngIf means just in a moment. But this is a directive, and this has instructions written in a module, which we will also get into future lectures about directives, where we take a much deeper look into what directives are and how custom directives can be built by you. But for now, we are just going to understand what a directive does. So in short, a directive is a structure, and this structure gives instructions to the DOM. So let's look what a directive looks like and how directives can be made by just reading the documentation. So to build a directive, what we have to say is, let's say we give a directive as app highlight. So we have to create a directive, say ng generate directive. So this is a CLI command out here. So we can generate directives like that. But for now, what we are going to do is we are going to use some built-in directives to understand how attribute directives and how structural directives are actually working. So the directives that we are going to be using are ngIf, ngElse, so basically if and else, and ng-for. So these are the three directives that we are going to be using today. And after I show you how to use these directives, I will also be giving you an assignment, and that will be your last assignment for this Angular tutorial, and we will wrap it up after that. In the future, we will be actually discussing every single bit that we have learned about today, that is components, data binding, two-way data binding, directives, everything will be done in much more detail. And when we are doing this in detail, we will have an overarching project. So we will be building a project through the course of this playlist. And by the end, you will feel pretty confident that you can go out there and pretty much crack Angular interview job out there, because we will be teaching you how to build an app. And in the end, we will also train you for Angular interview questions. Okay. But for now, let's just focus on how to use the built-in directives that ship with Angular. So to use the built-in directives, let's see what we can do. So the first directive that we want to use is basically an ngIf directive. So let's see what we can do to show ngIf. So ngIf is basically to show something structurally. Let's put up an h1 that says this is an example of ngIf. Now we want to show something if a variable is true, and we want to show something else if it is false, right? So we can do that by simply saying p. So we will show a paragraph, and let's say ngIf. So we are going to tie it up to an expression, and we're going to call this expression a flag. And we are going to say flag is true, and we are going to say flag is false otherwise. So out here, to show flag is false otherwise, we are going to use something called a local reference. So a local reference is used within the ng template. So for the ng template, we have to give a local reference name. So let's call it the else block. And in the else block, we want to put out a paragraph that says flag is false. Now we need some way to actually toggle this flag. So let's create a button. So we are going to say something like toggle flag, and out here for toggling flag, we are going to put an event, and we are going to bind this event to a function that toggles our flag. So we are going to call this function toggle flag. Okay, so we have our template created. Now all we need to do is add the business logic for this. So for all the logic that we need to do is create a variable called flag first of all. So let's go ahead and delete all this that we don't need. So we are going to have a variable called flag, and flag will be first of all set to true. Now there is also going to be a function called toggle flag, and in this function what we are going to do is we are just going to toggle it. Now to toggle this, all we can do is this dot flag equals to not of this dot flag. So this is a really easy way to toggle a variable, and just now we can just return this dot flag. So since we're doing that, so now what we can do is save this, and let's see how that actually works. So it says flag is true and flag is false. So flag is false is actually not being displayed because we have not referenced this local reference that we have created. So we have a local reference and we need to create it, and we do that by saying else. We create the else block. Now let's go ahead and save that. Let's see, flag is true, and now flag is false. Flag is true, flag is false. So to make sure that we are actually putting up two different paragraphs, so let's go ahead and inspect this. Let's go into our body, let's go into uproot, and let's see this button. So this has a paragraph created out here. So let's toggle this, and a new paragraph gets created which says flag is false. Now flag is true, flag is false, flag is true, flag is false. So this is a brilliant way to actually show something very conditionally. Now I can show you this is other block that we are actually showing. Instead of one block being constantly just modified, it is a separate block in itself. So that is a very important thing to note. So let's go ahead and do that again. So let's save it. And now let's go ahead and see what we can get. So in our head, or rather in the body, we have the uproot, and now we have paragraph that says flag is true. And now there is another paragraph with the ID flash, which is a very wrong way to spell false, but it proves the point that this is a new block in itself. So this is how you can use ngIf. Now let's look at another interesting inbuilt directive that ships with Angular, and that is ngStyle. So with ngStyle, what you can do is you can give dynamic styling depending on a certain condition. Now, if you analyze what we have out here, we do have a certain condition, which is whether flag is true or flag is false. Now, what we want to do is we want to color this. This is an example of ngIf into red or green if flag is true or false, respectively. So we can do that very easily with the help of something called ngStyle. So with ngStyle, what we do is we give a property. Now this property may not be in single quotation marks. So you can say color, and what you can do is you can put an expression. Now you can say something like a function that is get color, and you could execute that. Now what we need to do is we need to go ahead and create this function called get color. So we are going to get the color, and we are going to return a color that is probably a string according to the flag. So what we want to say is if this dot flag is equals to true, we want to return green, and if it is false, we want to return red. So let's go ahead and see. So as you guys can see, this is green right now, and this turns red, and then turns green and red again. So what we did basically, we passed an expression, and in this expression, we are putting in a color, and the get color method is returning a string which either says red or green. So this is how you can dynamically add styles to your elements on your HTML page. Now, another way to do dynamic styling is with the help of ngClass. So what we can do out here is we can add a class to an element dynamically. So let's say we have another h2, and let's say this is just an example of ngClass. Now what I want to do is we want to turn this. So the class we want to add is basically, let's call it white, and we want to add this when get color returns true, let's say. So we just want to go ahead and paste that logic out there. And now what we have to do is go into the app component CSS file and create a class called white. And this class will basically put a black border 1px solid black. It will rather, let's make it a red, and then we want a background color of, let's say, black, and we want the font color to go white. So this is a bunch of styling that we are adding, which is basically the real reason you use classes in CSS, so that you can use a bunch of styling together. Now that we have created the class, let's go ahead and save all our files, and let's go ahead and see what it looks like. So this is what it looks like. This is just an example of ngClass. Now when this is set to false, the class is removed. Let me just show that to you. So if we go ahead in the body part and go into uproot and just look at this class that will be added. So we add a class called white, and then we remove a class called white, and this is how ngClass can be used to put in all sorts of dynamic styling into your HTML elements with the help of ngClass. Okay, so the next directive that we are going to have a look at is called ngFor. So let me just give you guys a quick example of how to use ngFor before I dive into the last assignment of this tutorial. So ngFor is used when you actually want to iterate through an array. So let me just show you what I mean. So let's say you had a bunch of names, or let's make something very viable. So first of all, let's call this something like the student roster. So h1, so this is called the student roster. Now suppose you had a method, so input, and what we are going to say is placeholder is name, and Out here, we also want to display the name. So all the name of the students we will want to display. So student roster, and there will be a button to say submit. So this will say submit student name, and this will have a function. So whenever we click it, we want to add the name that we just entered into, let's say, an array. So we can say add is the name of the function. Now what we want to do is go ahead and first of all create a student roster. So student roster is equals to, let's say, let's add some pre-built students. So Arya, and let's say Rohit, and let's say Upasana. Now what we want to do is, let me just fix these white spaces up. Now what we want to do is we want to display the student roster, and then we also want to add to the student roster every time the button is clicked. So we have a function for that, and it's called add. And basically what we want to do is we want to push an element. So that could be a current name. So current name could be blank for now, and let's leave it like that. And what we want to say is this dot student roster dot push, we want to push in this dot current name. So what this will do is this will push in the current name. Let's go ahead and make a place so that we can display it. Now the whole point is that we want to display it in one single item. We do not want to create, let's say, a paragraph for every time this list has to be populated. So what we can do is we can simply create a list item, and out here we can just say ng for, let's say, names in the student roster. So student roster. So is that how we had named it? Student roster, and that's exactly how we had named it. And what we want to display out is the names. So what we have done right now is we are pushing in something, but what exactly are we pushing in? Well, we need to add that to our input. So what we need to do is say ng model, and we are going to ng model this into the current name. So now that we have done that, now what we want to do is we just want to interpolate the name out here. So this will just display the names. So this is going to be names. Let's go ahead and save that. Let's see that if it displays the names. So we have the names Arya, Rohit, and Upasana. So let's say someone like Rahul also joins the class. And we can say submit student, and Rahul is now added to the student roster. Okay, so this is how you can basically use ng-for. We have one list item, and basically it is going around and circulating through everything that is there in this array just out here. So now that we have seen the usage of ng-if, ng-if else, and ng-for, let's go ahead and do our last assignment. Let's not forget, we also saw how we can use dynamic styling. So we are also going to incorporate that into our assignment. So let me just go ahead and type out the instructions for your assignment. Okay, guys, so this is your last assignment. I will again remind you that for assignments, you have to pause the screen and try and do the assignment on your own. And then you can compare your solution with the code along part that comes after the assignment. So for assignment number 3, we have create a button to toggle a paragraph display. The paragraph could be saying anything. So after that, we have to log the number of times the button was clicked. Okay, so it says button out here, but its button was clicked. And after the 5th click, we have to give some specific style to the log. Okay, so this seems like a pretty easy thing to do. What we have to do out here is basically get rid of everything that is here. And let's first create a button that says toggle display. And then we can add a paragraph that says lorem ipsum. So lorem ipsum is just a random paragraph. So let's go ahead and see this. So this says toggle display, but toggle display at this moment does nothing. So we have to put a functionality into the click. So click will basically return true or false. So we can bind this to a function that, let's say, toggle display. So this will return true or false. So we have to go ahead and create the toggle display method first. So toggle display, and what we want to say is this dot state, let's say. So let's create a state variable first. So state is going to be true, and toggling is basically what we had learned, that we have to turn it into something that it is not. So this dot state equals to not of this dot state, and that should do it for us. So this will toggle the display. So now that we have toggled the display, now all we have to do is bind this logic. So we say ng if, and we only want to show this if state is equals to true. So if that is what we have done correctly, we are toggling the display and this is true. Now what we need to do, another thing is, according to the instructions of the assignment, is that we have to log the number of times the button was clicked. So what we need is basically a counter to count the number of times we have clicked the button. Now every time the button is clicked, we want to actually increase the counter, and we can simply do that with an incremental statement. So this dot counter, now what we want to do is we want to say out here we want to create a paragraph, and this will have ng for, and so click of clicks, so rather counter. So for ng for, this needs to be pushed into an array. So we are going to say button click. Okay, so there's another way to do this. We don't really need a counter, or rather we can make counter into an array itself, and when this is clicked, all we need to do is say this dot counter dot push a counter dot length plus 1. So we're going to say this dot counter dot length plus 1. So the length initially is 0, so they should just go ahead and add it to this counter. Now what we want to do is we also want to cycle through this array of counters. So clicks in counters, and what we want to do is we want to print out the click information. So let's see. So now that we have actually put the logic to push the length of a counter into our array, we need to do and cycle this array. So to cycle the array, we are going to create a paragraph, and we're going to say ng for, and we're going to say clicks of counter. And what we are going to try and interpolate out here is the counter, or rather the clicks, and let's see if that works. So out here we have our display. We're going to click it once, click it twice, and we can see it goes on and on and on. And we have kind of created a counter, and this is kind of logging it all down. Now that we have set up our counter for our toggling, all we need to do is follow the last instruction, and that is after the 5th click, we have to give some specific style to the log. Okay, so we can do this with the help of ng styles. So ng styles, let's see, we want to make the color of our font blue only when get length is more than 5. So get length is a function. So this will return some value or the other. So let's go ahead and create that too. So get length is going to react and create if, let's see, this dot counter dot length is greater than 4, then we want to return the string blue, else we want to return the string black. So now we have a function that returns something, and we have binded that function with the color style with the use of ng style directive. So let's go ahead and see if this works for us. So let's toggle the display 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and that has turned our list into a blue list just after 5. So this is how you would approach the solution to assignment 3. And this brings us to the end of this Angular tutorial. We learned a lot today. We saw what is Angular. We saw the differences that Angular 8 has brought about in the industry. After that, we also started with installation of Angular. Then we went ahead and set up our project. We learned how to create our own custom components manually and through the CLI. Then we came to know how to use these components. We did data binding, did property binding, and then we did event binding, which of course includes two-way binding. Then of course we saw the inbuilt directives and what exactly directives are. And this brings us to the end of the basics that you need to actually make an application through Angular. So now we are going to see in the future with the future playlist that we are creating here at Edureka, that how we can dive deeper into components, routing, dependency injection, and a lot of other fancy advanced stuff that you can do with Angular. and there will be an overarching project in all of this. So stay tuned, guys. But for now, all I want to say is thank you for actually being with me till the end. I hope you guys had fun learning Angular with me. I'll meet you guys in the next video. Until next time then, goodbye.
I hope you have enjoyed listening to this video. Please be kind enough to like it, and you can comment any of your doubts and queries, and we will reply them at the earliest. Do look out for more videos in our playlist and subscribe to Edureka channel to learn more. Happy learning!